NodeRED didn't just arrive. That's been one of the really satisfying things of having started the project and built the open source community, is the community of people who have come to NodeRED, recognize its value, and maybe they start doing home automation with it. Maybe they start just playing with it. But then they start realizing, actually, this is something I can use in my day job. I've got this problem at work. NodeRED's a perfect fit.
Welcome, Nick. I feel like it's a bit awkward to introduce you because you're so famous already, especially well known for creating NodeRED. One tidbit I can maybe share to our audience is that you also helped speccing the MQTT standard before it was well adopted and very well known. And that makes you have almost over a decade of IoT experience. Basically, you were working on IoT before IoT was a thing, before Internet of Things needed to be abbreviated to IoT. Can you tell me a little about the early days of IoT?
So from my past life at IBM, working in a team with Andy Stanford Clark, the creator, inventor of MQTT, it was a really interesting space because it really sort of spoke to my personal enjoyment of working with gadgets and getting things talking to each other. And as you say, this was right on the cusp of IoT turning into a more common phrase than it was then. But it was still true to say people had connectivity challenges. MQTT came as a result of a customer wanting to monitor oil fields remotely over satellite, and every single byte that got transmitted over that satellite would add up to like an additional $1 million a year of bandwidth type of thing. So I think there are a lot of sort of the core problems of IoT, challenges of IoT, go back much further of this idea of remote connectivity. And the sorts of devices you'd have at the edge of the network, much more constrained, much less capable. I think we all take for granted the supercomputers we have in our pockets of our mobile phones, but that you don't have to go back far to realize the edge compute power at a cost point that was feasible for being able to connect devices at scale. There were some really interesting challenges, and certainly in the MQTT space, the sorts of use cases we were seeing from customers was super varied, from, I say, monitoring oil pipelines to, I remember there was a project with a police force who would be controlling the deployment of the lockbox controlling the firearms in their car would be done via MQTT. And just really, and this was as quite a junior engineer at the time at IBM, it was really eye-opening to the real practical uses of some of this technology. But it was super interesting. And then also over my time at IBM, working for a company the scale of IBM, obviously some of IBM's customers are super interested in just the sheer scale of, that they have business plans that would have millions of devices wanting to connect. And some of the challenges about how you go from thinking about a small organization with a few dozen sensors to someone who wants to be able to connect literally millions of devices and have real-time data from them. It's super interesting.
And so you touched a bit on Moore's law. So there's more compute available now over the last decade at cheaper prices. And then since IoT was launched, there's also the IIoT and Industry 4.0. How you've seen that adoption in the open source community of the NodeRED project you started, but also at IBM or more general in enterprises?
The increased compute power just puts more capability at the edge of the network. The constraints change, so you don't have to be as conscious about bandwidth. You are able to push more compute power to the edge. So rather than it purely being about data acquisition and just grabbing data from the edge so you can then do something with it at the center, you then see that trend of pushing compute to the edge. So you don't need to get a sensor reading every second all the way to the core of your business. What you want is, perhaps it's a rolling average, or you want to have the alerts when it goes out of band or some trigger. So you can start thinking about what does it mean to build an application where the logic, the intelligence is more distributed and you can push bits of intelligence out to the edge? And I think that was one of the big trends over the last 10 years of just the whole idea of edge computing, well-trodden space. But again, it's incredible just how much you can now do with relatively low-cost hardware at the edge and really focus on what the data is you want to get and how you want to transform it and where you want to get it, without just that assumption you have to get everything back to the center and to do all the heavy lifting there.
And so the edge got smarter. And then over the past decade, you could also say that the cloud had a giant surge of adoption. Do you see adoption challenges there for organizations, and how do they balance edge versus cloud?
Every organization has its own challenges about how they choose to architect their solutions. With cloud-based, particularly public cloud-based solutions, a lot of industry, a lot of manufacturing are historically fairly conservative about their data, and as are many organizations. And I think a lot of organizations prefer to keep their data within their own firewall. But even within that type of organization, whether it's a public cloud or a sort of a private cloud, a cloud within the organization, you then look at organizations which are very distributed, a lot of factories, a lot of sites, being able to have a system where they can have that data from across factories, bringing it together. So it's no longer individual factories working in isolation. You are actually able to push the data up, again, the appropriate data, but you can get better visibility across your whole organization. But that brings its own challenges about how you can organize that data, how do you structure it, what's the semantic model around it, all those sorts of challenges which will be very familiar to organizations.
In the show, we spoke a bit about NodeRED. Can you talk a bit about what NodeRED means in the IoT space or the IoT space?
Absolutely. So NodeRED as this open source low code integration platform, effectively. One of the great successes we've seen with it from its open source nature is it's just a super versatile toolkit for connecting to pretty much anything and then doing anything with that data. So traditionally in the industrial space, you would end up with a lot of vendor specific hardware, which, super powerful in its own right, but you could only do what it allowed you to do, or it might come with certain APIs, toolkits that make it just hard to work with in an agile, progressive manner. So a tool like NodeRED is super easy just to run alongside those devices, use it to grab your data, transform your data, and you can be very opportunistic that you realize, actually, now I've got a NodeRED running there, I could go grab this other bit of data from over there, or maybe I've got a piece of hardware that's 30 years old, happily still doing the manufacturing job it was designed for, but it's not got all the connectivity that you would expect from a modern machine. But NodeRED makes it super easy to almost retrofit some of that intelligence and data gathering from those platforms. So we see NodeRED used a lot in the IoT space on the factory floor for just the versatility it provides for grabbing data from wherever you want to get it and then transforming it and pushing it where you need it to be.
Which then also buys organizations the flexibility to make decisions on edge versus cloud where they see fit, whenever they see fit.
Absolutely. And it's that sort of dynamic versatility that they can, the ease with which NodeRED lets you make changes, deploy changes, understand the flows and the flow of your data. You can start with a model where you're pushing all your data up to the core. You may decide actually it makes more sense to do some of that, as I mentioned, push some of that intelligence out to the edge. And that's super simple with NodeRED, just to push the appropriate flows out to your edge devices, do some transformation and push that smarter data back to your organization. It gives you that versatility wherever you want to run the logic of NodeRED.
And so NodeRAD is a very successful open source project. It's being pulled on Docker Hub millions of times a month. And then there's NPM installs. A lot of these NodeRADs end up in production sites. Can you talk a little bit about how NodeRAD got into the enterprise and industrial setting, how adoption is different for open source projects in enterprises versus proprietary paid for software?
Absolutely. So NodeRED didn't just arrive. That's been one of the really satisfying things of having started the project and built the open source community, is the community of people who have come to NodeRED, recognize its value, and maybe they start doing home automation with it, maybe they start just playing with it, but then they start realizing, actually, this is something I can use in my day job. I've got this problem at work, NodeRED's a perfect fit. So I think we've seen a lot of almost that grassroots adoption of NodeRED within organizations, where engineers recognize its value within moments of playing with it, and they bring it to bear to the problems they face. So for a lot of organizations, it tends to be a bottom-up adoption of NodeRED, because it's the tool the engineers want to use, rather than being something that high up in the organization mandate is made. One of the benefits there is it being open source. You haven't got to worry about the commercial deal to start even just exploring the use of NodeRED. It's open source, you can adopt it. It's not a free lunch. It does have a different set of challenges. Some organizations are wary of open source and trust around bringing software into the organization. Some organizations are less certain about just running pure open source if there's not someone that they can actually phone up to get help and support with. And then there's sort of the more operational side of NodeRED of, yes, it unlocks that power for engineers, but how do you manage it at scale? How do you secure it? All those concerns that your CIO or your ops team are going to have about any piece of software running in your organization. So I think those are the challenges that we've seen over the life of NodeRED, and very much what we at FlowFuse are here to help address across how organizations can mature their use of NodeRED.
Yeah. And so you were saying the adoption of NodeRED is bottom up, and then as soon as the higher levels in the organization get aware of NodeRED, that's where an organization like FlowFuse can update the status quo of the open source adopted. And so, is there a certain cutoff point, or an immediate need, or is this how does that buying process, how is that influenced by the engineers already having tens of NodeREDs in the organization?
Across the customers we've been working with and talking to, we see people at a variety of different stages of where their own sort of maturity of their use of NodeRED sits. And sometimes they will have already created some of their own solutions to these problems, but again, as an organization, their key skill isn't managing homegrown software to manage the security or the deployment of things in their organization. They would much rather focus on their core strengths, which is the manufacturing side of things, and be able to have a solution just rolled out that solves all that for them. And you'll get some who are very early on in their journey, engineers using NodeRED on the factory floor, but they're also they're not sneaking it in. They're realizing actually there's value here, and they are taking that responsible step of saying, how can we scale this? How can we do it more formally? And they're the ones who bring it to their organization to say, look, we need a better solution here to help us manage NodeRED. And then there are, clearly there are some who come to us because they are interested in using NodeRED. They haven't really deployed it yet, but they want to start from square one of having a rock solid solution from the very beginning of their NodeRED adoption. And again, that's something that FlowFuse is very much there to help enable.
So we spoke about the open source nature of NodeRED and how that aids adopting, especially for engineers. Then there's this extensive library of 5,000 plus integrations. What you made as a key decision, I would say, in NodeRED's lifetime is the low code aspect. Was this a design decision right up front?
The original problem I was setting up to solve when, that first day writing that first line of code was actually visualizing mapping data in an MQTT ecosystem. So it on day one, it was, with my MQTT background, the very, very first thing you could run that turned into NodeRED was something that showed an MQTT topic an MQTT topic, and you could draw a wire to say, right, just any messages on that topic, republish them on that topic. So it was the visual aspect, the low code aspect of it was very much one of the criteria I had in mind for those first lines of code I wrote. And then as soon as you've got a tool that shows how data can move between topics, you then ask the question, well, it'd be nice to be able to change the data and transform the data. So that sort of then informed the next node. And then it turned into where else might you want to get data from? And so that added more nodes. And it was a very natural progression from that initial visualization of MQTT topics to actually a representation of data acquisition, transformation, and visualization.
Yeah. You could argue that this design choice right off the bat made it possible for it being adopted so widely. Now there's terms in the industry around IoT convergence or citizen development. This was something that came after you made the decision. It is, and maybe you even influenced this being an industry trend.
Yeah, I wouldn't lay claim to that. I'll leave that for others to decide, but I'm far too modest. I still think of NodeRED as that little side project I started all those years ago with Dave at IBM. And yeah, I'm still just amazed at where it has got to and the adoption we see and the community that's built around it. Because yes, a lot of the engineering work around NodeRED, a lot of the key decisions, those were things we laid the groundwork for very early on in the project. But then, the continued growth of the project and the adoption of the project is just a reflection of the community around it. And as you say, over 5,000 integrations in the community. As a platform, it's easy to pick up, start talking, connecting it to other things, easy to extend if you need it to talk to something that isn't currently available. Yeah, it's just the versatility has been a big driver. And that speaks to then having tools and open source as a general trend that engineers can start playing with without having to get into lots of purchase agreements and the like before they can even get started. It is that, as you say, the citizen developer grassroots angle of just getting the tools in the hands of people who just want to be productive. That's at the end of the day, that's what NodeRED's about. It's empowering people to be productive, create the solutions and the value that they need quickly and not get in the way.
In the end, it's all about people, apparently, like they working together on their flows and them being successful with a tool as NodeRED. Can you talk a little bit more about how FlowFuse can help transform it from a single user tool to a team collaborative tool suite?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned before, a lot of people in the very early days picked up NodeRED and they are just individuals working on NodeRED. Maybe it's home automation, maybe it's something at work, but they're individuals. And a lot of the NodeRED experience is about having a single runtime. But obviously an organization that wants to run lots of NodeREDs and scale it out in that sense, you need to make sure you've got consistent security across all those NodeREDs, so you know who's changing what, who has access to what. You need to be able to keep track of what changes are made. You need to know what versions of software are being run because of the versatility of all these extra nodes you can install. So there's lots of sort of operational concerns with NodeRED that, NodeRED does provide a lot of ways to solve these problems in a single runtime. But how do you solve that across 100 or 1,000 NodeREDs that you've got in your organization? So those are the challenges that FlowFuse is there to help solve, providing you a consistent security model across all of your NodeREDs, role-based access control, so you can have teams of users with selected access to different parts of your NodeRED runtimes. You've got audit logging, so you can get a record of who's changed what across your infrastructure. All those sorts of tools that give you peace of mind. We've got the software bill of materials, so you can get a single view of all the different versions of anything running across all your NodeREDs. It's all these little things that can just give organizations better peace of mind, particularly when you look at various security accreditations like SOC 2 and ISO and all those sorts of things. there are just some basic requirements you need across your software to be able to verify you're running securely and verify that you are meeting your software development process is following those basic standards. And FlowFuse is there to help you meet that.
Unfortunately, that's all we got time for today. So I definitely want to thank you for your time and had a fun conversation. And even though I know you for 2.5, 3 years now, on a professional sense, I still learned a lot. So thanks for dropping by. Have a great day.
Thanks, CJ.